I already posted this in a shorter form to my blog, but then I found this subreddit, so I thought I would write a slightly longer version for you guys. When I was little, my dad was self-employed as an electrician and as an engineer. He often got hired by a camp up in the Northwoods of Wisconsin to work with anything that needed electrification and lighting in their buildings. My parents would go up there for weeks at a time and take me with them. This camp was like a second home to me, and all the old-timers working at the camp knew me as John's kid. Once I got old enough, my parents started enrolling me at the summer programs at the camp so that I'd have something to do while my dad worked. When I got to the 11 to 13-year-old age group, the program available was sleepaway camp, where you'd stay in cabins with other kids for 2 to 3 weeks. By that time, I knew the camp like the back of my hand, and this was a big camp too. I knew every nook and cranny, and I had no fear whatsoever of walking around after dark. And up there, when the sun went down, it got really dark. But it was no big deal for me. It was pretty comfortable. Anyway, the cabins for the 11 to 13-year-olds were in their own section of the camp, with their own assigned bathroom. The cabins themselves were very simple, one-room structures, so the bathroom was a separate facility, and you had to walk there with a flashlight if you needed to go in the middle of the night. One night, my cabin mate Kay and I did our last bathroom visit for the evening together to brush our teeth and do our business before heading to bed. On our way back to the cabin, she was walking a little bit ahead of me, because I was dawdling and looking up at the stars. About halfway down the path to our cabin, she turned around to say something to me, and she shone her flashlight towards me. I was kind of blinded by her sudden turning the light to me, but I still saw her face as it went from cheerful and calm to twisted in horror and terror. She let out a quick shriek of fear and bolted for the cabin, leaving me behind. She was kind of a socially awkward joker, so I thought she was just being weird and maybe trying to play a trick on me. Shrugging, I continued to the cabin after her, figuring that she'd be waiting for me there and try and jump me or something. When I got into the cabin, however, I found a very different story. Kay may have been a joker, but you could always tell when she was messing with you. She had a terrible poker face. She'd always start cracking up. Instead of finding her snickering or trying not to laugh, I found her on the floor, buried in our cabin counselor's arms and sobbing hysterically. "What's going on?" I asked, totally confused now. When she looked up at me, her face was still full of terror. "That wasn't you, right?" she asked. "You aren't playing a trick on me, right?" "What trick?" I asked. "I thought you were playing a trick on me." "There was something standing right behind you," she told me, still sobbing and trembling. "It was huge. It looked like a big, silver dog. You really didn't see it?" Now, there are no wolves in that area anymore, and I knew the camp well enough to know that nobody living or working there had a dog. The only large wildlife in the area are deer, bears, and maybe the occasional coyote. But they never come this far out of the woods and into the camp. In that area, there'd be nothing for a bear or a coyote to eat anyway, since we weren't allowed to have food in or around the cabins. The next day, when the sun was up, Kay showed me exactly where she saw the creature. There weren't any bushes or anything else that could have been confused for a big, silver animal, just trees and dirt. The way she described it, it was almost as big as me. and I wasn't exactly a tiny kid. Anyway, I've never been able to figure out what was standing behind me that night. The cabin counselor dismissed it as Kay making up stories, but I saw the fear in her eyes. She wasn't lying. She really did see something. Has anyone else ever had an experience like this with a big, silver creature in the woods? Listen, I'll make this quick. I was smart. I was 17 years old, and I had just scored tremendously well on my ACT. I was accepted into an Ivy League school. Not only accepted, but a full ride. I was more than happy. I was ecstatic. Why did I have to go down that trail? I've often dreamt of going back in time and changing what I did that day. Let me explain. I live in the north. What if I told you portholes existed? Like portholes into another dimension, another reality. You probably wouldn't believe me, would you? Because I spent the past 5 goddamn years of my life trying to get people to believe me. But here's the thing. If you believe in something others don't, they'll ridicule you. They'll send you to therapists. If you're really lucky, they'll send you to a state-run mental institution where all you can hear are the guttural screams of the other patients. Pretty soon you'll start to wonder if the screams are coming from you. Why did I have to go down that trail? I've often dreamt of going back in time and changing what I did that day. Let me explain. I live in the north, in the dark forests of Wisconsin. Our house was swallowed by infinite trees from a young age. I learned to appreciate the stillness of nature. Oftentimes, the setting sun was my only reminder to head back home. It was a bright autumn day. The air was crisp, but cut through you like a knife. I'd been walking for at least 7 hours, and at this point ceased to recognize patterns in surrounding trees. That's okay. Knowing which direction you're facing means you'll never get lost. First, shadows of a setting sun danced off the trees, and I knew the darkness would come long before I reached home. That's when I heard it, a low, quiet buzzing that sounded like a generator. At first, that's exactly what I thought it was. But as the sun cast long shadows between the tall pine trees, I nervously remembered I was alone. Suddenly, the air was even more frigid. I should have turned around and gone home then, but I didn't. Instead, I followed the buzzing through the trees, scraping through branches and underbrush. By the time I reached the noise, I had all but given up on finding it. Only the last flecks of sunlight illuminated the branches. The funny thing is, I walked right past it at first. I only realized I passed it when the humming slowly began to fade. So I circled back. I can still remember the goosebumps, the hairs on my arms rising. Finally, I knew I was standing before the source. The humming peaked between 2 monstrous pines. I couldn't see anything, but I felt it emitting from that spot. As I stood there, looking for a source of the sound, I noticed something on the ground. From where I stood, it looked like some sort of animal's limb. In the woods, you see dead animals, and parts of dead animals occasionally. But as I walked closer, I saw it was dark and mutilated, and something was wrong. I felt my stomach sink. This thing, or what had once been a thing, was covered in dry blood. But its blood was blue. No, it wasn't a reddish blue. It was a bright poisonous blue. As I stood over it, the humming was so loud. The sound pierced through my skull and my eyes squinted in pain. I should have ran, but I needed to know what it was. How could I walk away from something so strange, so foreign? I crouched down and brushed leaves away, careful not to touch it. I felt my mouth open in confusion. It was a hand. To say it was human-like is an injustice, because it's like nothing I had ever seen. It was the same general shape and size of a human hand. As I stared closer, I saw it was covered with small scales, but they were unlike any reptiles. In its decay, those scales were rotting and falling off. It had 4 finger-like appendages emerging from it, and dull, yellowed nails. But the worst part was the blood. The sticky blue blood I knew could not be flowing through anything living in my forest. Suddenly, the buzzing intensified. As I looked up, I noticed the spot between the trees was now blurred. It was like I was looking through a dirty pane of glass, spanning the whole area between the pines, and I could see movement on the other side. At that moment, nothing else existed. What was I thinking? Perhaps the buzzing was so loud I wasn't thinking at all. I walked in, and the air in my lungs seemed to tighten and rocket out of my body. I felt like I was falling out of an airplane. My body hit the ground in a crumpled heap. And when I was finally strong enough to stand, I knew I shouldn't be there. The place was dark and cold. It wasn't my forest. I could hardly make out my surroundings. Gray, plant-like objects were what I focused on first. They were about 6 feet tall, thorny, and swaying to a wind that wasn't there. There was no sun, no clouds, and the sky was shrouded in a sickly green color. As I looked around, I was hit by the immense silence. No breeze, no birds, no wind. I panicked. I jumped up and looked for the gap I had come from. Nothing. The 2 pines weren't there. All I could see was a vast landscape of slightly swaying plants. I started running. I don't even remember what direction I was going. Just a sea of endless gray plants. I saw the first shadows out of the corner of my eye. They weren't moving, but I knew they were watching me. As I ran, it seemed like I was suddenly surrounded by more and more on either side of me. Same silence, same endless stares, same drilling eyes. I felt like I was in a never-ending loop. You know how victims always fall in horror movies? I felt, partly because of the terror, mostly because of exhaustion. I want to say I kept going, but I couldn't breathe. I couldn't take it anymore. When I hit the ground, I laid there. I couldn't move anymore, and my breath escaped my mouth in sharp, silent exhales. In my head, I promised to fight when they came for me. I promised to die trying to live. Of course, they came for me. They were misshapen creatures, not like anything here on Earth. Bald heads, large black eyes with no iris. Those eyes were somehow sinister and intelligent, and their twisted red mouths were somehow human-like. There was a filthy gray, almost translucent color to their scaly flesh. They stood on 2 mangled feet and had 2 distorted hands, just like the one I had seen in my forest. They hunched over me as I silently prayed to be killed painlessly. One reached out a stubby hand to touch my face, my exposed arm. And then I saw it put its head back and open its mouth. To this day I know it was laughing. It was mocking me, but I couldn't hear it. Moments later, I lay in a heap on the dirt floor of my northern Wisconsin woods. Even with my eyes closed, I felt the bright sunlight. It should be dark now. The sound of winds, trees swaying, birds chirping suddenly filled my ears as I scrambled up trembling. As I desperately glanced around, I could feel something watching me. I knew it was one of them. I ran home as fast as I could. When I finally got there, I broke down and cried. My parents had been out looking for me. They told me I'd been missing for 2 days. I made the mistake of trying to explain what happened. I still don't know where I went that day, but I know it was somewhere bad. Somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. Maybe you think this story isn't real. Don't you think I tried to convince myself of that? I woke up next morning from a fitful sleep and my skin, exactly where the creature touched me, was bright red and throbbing. I wish I could say that's all. I wish I could say I forgot about what happened and went on to college afterwards. But that's not what happened. From time to time, I could feel something watching me, and I knew. I would stand on my back porch long enough to see its shadow disappear behind a tree. Try living a normal life when you know those creatures are out there, and they know your face. I found their secret. I know they exist. I want to thank you for watching, and I will be coming out with more content in the coming weeks. If you like this video, feel free to check out my channel and my Let's Talk series, and subscribe to my channel by clicking the subscribe button. If there is a specific topic you would like me to cover, feel free to contact me here on YouTube and on Twitter. There will be a link below in the description. And once again, thanks for watching.